Imagine living in a quiet Kansas neighborhood where the loudest sound at night is the wind through the trees. Families felt safe, doors were left unlocked, and yet, hidden in plain sight, lived a man who would terrorize the city of Wichita for 3 decades. He was a family man, a church leader, even a trusted compliance officer. But behind closed doors, Dennis Rader became something much darker, something he named himself: BTK, bind, torture, kill. The nightmare began on January 15th, 1974. The Otero family, a husband, wife, and 2 of their children, were brutally murdered inside their Wichita home. The killer left behind a disturbing scene: victims bound, strangled, and posed. At first, police thought it might be a burglary gone wrong. But then letters started arriving, detailed, chilling descriptions of the murders. The writer took credit, signing off with 3 letters: BTK. From that moment, Wichita realized they weren't dealing with a random crime. They were dealing with a serial predator. Dennis Rader himself invented his own nickname: bind, torture, kill. 3 words that perfectly described his twisted fantasies. He craved recognition, feeding his ego by sending letters and taunting the media. For him, murder wasn't just about control, it was about legacy. He wanted the world to remember his name, and it worked. Every time BTK wrote a letter, newspapers ran the headlines, the city spiraled into fear. But here's the disturbing part. While the public feared BTK, Dennis Rader was living an entirely normal life. He was married with 2 children. He worked for ADT Security, installing alarm systems to protect families. Ironically, many of them were terrified of BTK. He served as president of his local church council. He even volunteered as a Boy Scout leader. To neighbors, he seemed strict, even uptight but never dangerous. Nobody suspected that the man giving sermons and leading prayers was the same monster who stalked and killed in the shadows. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, BTK continued his murders, always binding, torturing, and killing, sometimes taking souvenirs, always taking pleasure in control. The police were desperate. They looked at thousands of suspects. DNA testing in those early years was primitive, so evidence sat in storage, waiting for science to catch up. And then, in 1991, BTK simply vanished. The murders stopped. Wichita breathed a sigh of relief. People began to think he was dead, in prison, or had moved away. But the truth was even scarier. Dennis Rader was still there, still going to work, still attending church. He just stopped killing. For over a decade, silence. Then in 2004, out of nowhere, BTK resurfaced. Letters started arriving again. A serial killer who had vanished for more than 30 years was suddenly back in the headlines. Why? Because Dennis Rader couldn't resist the attention. He saw documentaries about unsolved cases, and it bothered him. He wanted people to remember that BTK was still out there. This return was his biggest mistake. In 2004, BTK sent police a package that included a floppy disk. He asked detectives if it could be traced, and the police cleverly lied, saying no. When they analyzed the disk, metadata revealed The file had been saved at Christ Lutheran Church, and the username was Dennis. That was enough. Police secretly began following Rader. They compared DNA from his daughter's medical record to evidence saved from crime scenes. The match was undeniable. After 30 years of hunting, they finally had BTK. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was pulled over while driving home. After decades of terror, the man who thought he was untouchable sat handcuffed in the back of a police car. When questioned, Rader showed no remorse. Instead, he coldly recounted his murders in chilling detail, almost as if he was proud of them. He admitted to 10 murders between 1974 and 1991. He described stalking victims for weeks, breaking into homes, binding them, torturing them, and finally killing them, often for his own sexual gratification. In court, Rader was calm, even polite. He gave lengthy, horrifying accounts of each crime. The victims' families wept as he described what he did, sometimes with disturbing precision. In August 2005, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Today, Dennis Rader is serving his sentence at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he will spend the rest of his life. Psychologists who studied Rader concluded he was a sadistic psychopath with a compulsive need for control. He lived for the thrill of planning, stalking, and carrying out his murders. But what made him unique was his double life. Unlike many killers, Rader thrived on being seen as respectable. His church community admired him. His family never suspected him. That mask of normalcy made him even more terrifying. The BTK case remains one of the most infamous in American criminal history, not just because of the brutality of his crimes, but because of the way Rader manipulated the city for decades. He wasn't just killing people, he was feeding off fear, controlling an entire community from the shadows. And in the end, his arrogance, his desperate need for recognition was what finally brought him down. Dennis Rader once wrote in a letter that people would never stop looking for BTK, and in a way, he was right. His crimes still haunt Wichita. His name still chills true crime audiences.